The time of troubles. Russia on the brink. Imagine a country so shattered that even its name seemed to echo with despair. In 1612, Russia wasn't just struggling, it was on the edge of total collapse. Historians call it the time of troubles. But that phrase barely scratches the surface of the chaos that reigned. Picture entire cities emptied by famine, villages wiped out by plague, and families torn apart by war. The numbers are staggering. Up to a third of the population simply vanished, claimed by hunger, disease, or violence. For those who survived, daily life was a nightmare of uncertainty. Foreign armies marched through the heart of Russia, seizing control of Moscow, Smolensk, and Novgorod. The capital itself was occupied, its people forced to watch as outsiders dictated their fate. The old order had crumbled, and with it, any sense of safety or hope. But the suffering didn't end there. As the land was ravaged, rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of betrayal, of leaders turning on their own people, of secret deals struck in the shadows. The Russian throne was a revolving door with pretenders and impostors rising and falling in quick succession. No one knew who to trust, and every day brought new dangers. Some wondered if Russia would even survive as a nation, or if it would be carved up and forgotten by history. Yet in the midst of this darkness, something unexpected began to stir. Ordinary people, battered by years of hardship, started to dream of fighting back. The seeds of resistance were planted not by kings or generals, but by those who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. And as the world watched, a new chapter in Russia's story was about to begin, one that would shock everyone who thought the country was finished. But the real turning point was still to come. The rise of the Romanovs. Out of the ashes of chaos, two unlikely heroes emerged to change the course of Russian history. One was a prince, Dmitry Pozharsky, a man of noble blood but battered by the same turmoil as everyone else. The other was Kuzma Minin, a merchant from Nizhny Novgorod, known not for his wealth, but for his fierce determination and unbreakable spirit. Together they did what seemed impossible. They rallied a battered, starving population into a militia strong enough to challenge the foreign occupiers. With Moscow under enemy control, the odds were stacked against them. Yet, driven by desperation and a burning sense of unity, their ragtag army marched on the capital. The battle was brutal, but the Russian militia refused to back down. Against all expectations, they forced the Polish garrison out of Moscow, reclaiming the heart of their homeland. This victory was more than just a military triumph. It was a spark of hope in a country that had almost forgotten what hope felt like. For the first time in years, Russians saw a future that wasn't defined by fear and loss. But the question remained. Who would lead them out of the darkness? The answer came from the Zemsky Sobor, Russia's National Assembly, which made a decision that would echo for centuries. In a move that stunned the nation, they chose a 16-year-old noble, Mikhail Romanov, as the new Tsar. He was young, inexperienced, and untested, but he represented a fresh start, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. Mikhail's first act as Tsar was a difficult one. He traded away territory to secure peace, sacrificing land for the breathing room Russia so desperately needed. It was a controversial decision, but it bought the country time to heal. No one could have guessed that this teenager's reign would mark the beginning of a dynasty that would rule Russia for the next 300 years. But as the Romanovs took the throne, the scars of the time of troubles were far from healed, and new challenges were already looming on the horizon. Chains of serfdom and religious schism with the Romanovs now in power, Russia's wounds were far from healed. The new dynasty faced a nation desperate for stability, but the solutions they chose would leave scars that lasted for centuries. Tsar Mikhail's son, Alexei, set out to bring order to the chaos. But his methods were as harsh as the times demanded. In 1649, he introduced a sweeping new legal code, the Sobornoye Ulogenie, that would forever change the lives of ordinary Russians. With a single stroke of the pen, Alexei turned nearly 80% of the population into serfs, bound to the land, their status inherited by their children, and stripped of any right to choose their own fate. For millions, freedom became a distant memory, replaced by a life of endless labor and obedience to their masters. The countryside was locked in a system of generational bondage, and the echoes of this decision would haunt Russian society for 200 years. But the tightening grip of the state didn't stop at the fields. Even the soul of Russia was thrown into turmoil. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Nikon, believed the only way forward was through reform. He pushed for sweeping changes in religious practice, hoping to bring the church closer to its roots. Instead, his reforms tore the church apart. A bitter divide opened between those who embraced the new ways and the so-called old believers, who clung fiercely to tradition. Families were split, communities shattered, and the faithful forced to choose sides in a conflict that was as much about identity as it was about faith. The schism was so deep that its aftershocks are still felt today, centuries later. In their quest for unity, the Romanovs had unleashed forces that would shape the Russian soul in ways no one could have predicted. And while the country seemed to be finding its footing, beneath the surface, tensions were building. Tensions that would soon erupt in ways no one could ignore. War, rebellion, and ruthless suppression, as the Romanovs tightened their grip. Russia's borders became battlegrounds for power and survival. The next storm came from the west, where Ukrainian Cossacks, locked in a desperate struggle against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, turned to Tsar Alexei for help. In exchange for his military support, the Cossacks recognized him as their overlord, drawing Russia into a brutal conflict that would rage for 13 years. The war was long and punishing, with entire regions caught in the crossfire. But when the dust finally settled, Russia emerged stronger, reclaiming the vital city of Smolensk and seizing control of eastern Ukraine. It was a hard-won victory, but it came at a staggering cost. Villages burned, families uprooted, and a new wave of refugees flooding into Russian lands. Yet, even as Russia expanded, the seeds of rebellion were taking root at home. The countryside, already suffocating under the weight of serfdom, became a powder keg of resentment. It was only a matter of time before someone lit the fuse. That someone was Stenka Razin, a renegade Cossack whose name would soon strike fear into the hearts of the powerful. Razin's revolt swept through southern Russia like wildfire, drawing thousands of desperate peasants and outcasts to his cause. For a brief, chaotic moment, it seemed as if the old order might collapse once again. Razin's forces looted towns, toppled local authorities, and challenged the very foundation of Tsarist rule. But the Romanovs had learned from the chaos of the past. Determined to crush any threat to their authority, they responded with overwhelming force. The rebellion was hunted down, its leaders captured, and its followers scattered. Stenka Razin himself was dragged to Moscow, where his fate was sealed in a spectacle meant to terrify anyone who dared to dream of freedom. His execution, brutal and public, sent a clear message. Defiance would be met with merciless punishment. The countryside fell silent, but the memory of Razin's uprising lingered, a warning that beneath the surface, Russia's people were far from tamed. And as the Romanovs celebrated their victories, new challenges were already gathering on the horizon, ready to test the limits of their power. Reformers, regents, and the shadow of power, while the Romanovs had managed to stamp out rebellion and expand their territory, the real battle for Russia's future was happening behind palace walls. After the chaos of Razin's revolt, the throne passed to Fyodor III, a ruler whose frail health masked a sharp and restless mind. Fyodor saw that Russia's old ways were holding it back, so he set out to break the chains of tradition. In a move that shocked the nobility, he abolished the ancient system of местничество, a rigid hierarchy that handed out government posts based on family rank rather than ability. Fyodor's reforms were radical for their time. He demanded that merit, not birth, decide who would serve the state. To drive the point home, he ordered the ceremonial burning of the old books of rank, a symbolic act that sent ripples through the aristocracy. But Fyodor's reign was tragically short. He died at just 19, leaving the throne in the hands of his sister Sophia, who became Princess Regent. Sophia was no mere caretaker. She was a shrewd and ambitious leader, ruling on behalf of her younger brothers, the joint Tsars Ivan V and Peter I. Under her watch, Russia began to look outward, forging new alliances and signing treaties that would shape its destiny for generations. One of her most significant achievements was brokering the first treaty between Russia and China, a landmark agreement that finally established a clear frontier between the two vast empires. At the same time, Sophia steered Russia into the complex web of European politics, joining the so-called Holy League in its struggle against the Ottoman Empire. But power in Russia was never secure for long. Sophia's position was constantly threatened by court intrigue and the ambitions of her younger brother, Peter. The palace became a battleground of whispers and secret alliances, with every decision weighed against the risk of betrayal. Even as Russia's influence grew abroad, the struggle for control at home was relentless. The fate of the nation hung in the balance, teetering between reform and tradition, progress and resistance. And as the next generation prepared to seize the reins, the stage was set for a transformation that would shake Russia to its core. Peter the Great's revolution. The struggle for power inside the Kremlin finally erupted when a restless, ambitious teenager decided he'd had enough of being sidelined. At just 17, Peter I seized control from his half-sister Sophia, ending her regency in a dramatic coup that left no doubt about who would shape Russia's future. But Peter wasn't content to rule from behind palace walls. He was determined to drag Russia, kicking and screaming if necessary, into the modern world. Unlike any czar before him, Peter set out on a journey across Europe, traveling incognito with his so-called Grand Embassy. He studied shipbuilding in Dutch shipyards, learned the latest military tactics, and absorbed the scientific advances that were transforming the West. For the first time, a Russian ruler was looking outward, hungry for knowledge and determined to bring it home. Peter's return marked the beginning of a revolution that would touch every corner of Russian life. He demanded that the nobility abandon their old ways, forcing them to dress in European styles, adopt Western customs, and even shave their beards, a move so controversial that he had to impose a special beard tax on those who refused. But these changes were more than just cosmetic. Peter built Russia's first navy from scratch, reformed the army with brutal efficiency, and overhauled the government to root out corruption and incompetence. He poured resources into industry, trade, and education, determined to close the gap between Russia and its European rivals. The true test of Peter's vision came with the outbreak of the Great Northern War. Facing off against the mighty Swedish Empire, Russia suffered a humiliating defeat at Narva, but Peter refused to back down. He rebuilt his forces, learned from his mistakes, and struck back with relentless determination. The turning point came at the Battle of Poltava, where Russian troops crushed the Swedish army and announced their arrival as a new power in the Baltic. To cement his legacy, Peter ordered the construction of a brand new capital, St. Petersburg, on the windswept marshes of the Baltic coast. The city rose quickly, a symbol of Russia's new ambitions, but its foundations were soaked with the sweat and blood of thousands of serfs who died building it. By the time the Treaty of Nystad ended the war, Russia had emerged as the dominant force in the region, and Peter's transformation of the country was undeniable. He was hailed as Peter the Great, father of his country, emperor of all the Russias. But behind the triumphs and titles, the cost of his revolution was staggering. The old Russia was gone, replaced by a nation that was stronger, more ambitious, and more ruthless than ever before. And as Peter's reign drew to a close, the question lingered. What price had Russia paid for greatness, and who would dare to follow in his footsteps? Turbulent successions and scandalous courts. The death of Peter the Great left a power vacuum that no one seemed able to fill. His legacy was immense, but the throne itself became a revolving door, with rulers rising and falling in rapid succession. First came his wife, Catherine, who inherited not just the crown, but the impossible task of living up to Peter's legend. Her reign was brief, and the crown soon passed to their grandson, Peter II, a boy king whose life was cut short by smallpox at just 14. The Russian court, once the center of Peter's grand ambitions, now became a stage for intrigue, decadence, and whispered betrayals. Empress Anna Ioannovna, daughter of Peter the Great's half-brother, swept into power with a reputation for extravagance and a taste for the dramatic. Her court was infamous for its lavish parties and the influence of her German favorite, Ernst Biron, whose grip on power made enemies at every turn. But Anna's reign wasn't just about excess. Under her rule, Russia's reach stretched even further. She sent Vitus Bering, a daring Danish explorer in Russian service, on a mission to chart the mysterious lands to the east. Bering's expeditions mapped the coast of Alaska, discovered the Aleutian Islands, and forever changed the world's understanding of the vast, frozen frontier separating Russia from America. His name would live on in the Bering Sea, a reminder of Russia's growing ambitions. Yet the throne remained a dangerous place. After Anna's death, her infant grandnephew Ivan VI was crowned, but his reign was doomed from the start. Barely more than a baby, Ivan was swept aside in a palace coup led by Peter the Great's own daughter, Elizabeth. Ivan spent his entire life in captivity, a living symbol of the dangers that came with royal blood. His tragic story ended in violence, murdered by his guards during a failed rescue attempt, his life a footnote in the brutal saga of Russian succession. Elizabeth, meanwhile, ruled with a mix of vanity and vigor. She was known for her beauty, her extravagant tastes, and her many young lovers, but she was also a formidable leader. In alliance with France and Austria, she led Russia into the 7 Years' War against Frederick the Great of Prussia, delivering a crushing defeat at the Battle of Kunersdorf. Yet, even victory brought little stability. Back in St. Petersburg, the Winter Palace was completed at staggering expense, a glittering symbol of imperial power that masked the uncertainty lurking beneath the surface. The Russian court had become a place where fortunes could rise and fall overnight, and where the next twist in the dynasty's story was always just around the corner. Betrayal, murder, and the rise of Catherine the Great as the glitter of the Winter Palace dazzled the Russian elite. The throne itself became a magnet for ambition, jealousy, and betrayal. The next chapter in the Romanov saga would be written in blood and secrecy. Peter III, grandson of Peter the Great, was never meant for the Russian crown. Raised in Denmark, he barely spoke the language of his own people and openly admired Frederick the Great, Russia's sworn enemy. When he took the throne, his bizarre decision stunned the court. In a move that left his generals speechless, Peter abruptly switched sides in the 7 Years' War, saving Prussia from defeat and infuriating the Russian army. His actions made him a pariah among the nobility and a laughingstock in the eyes of his own wife, the sharp and ambitious Catherine. But Catherine was no ordinary consort. Behind her reserved smile, she was quietly building alliances, winning over powerful nobles, and plotting her husband's downfall. The palace became a nest of conspiracies, with whispers of treason echoing through its gilded halls. In a swift and bloodless coup, Catherine and her supporters seized power, forcing Peter III to abdicate. Just a week later, he was dead, his demise shrouded in mystery and rumors of foul play. Officially, his death was blamed on hemorrhoidal colic, but few believed the story. The truth, as many suspected, was far darker. Some reports claim he was strangled by his own guards, while others suggest he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. What's certain is that his end cleared the way for one of the most remarkable reigns in Russian history. Catherine ascended the throne as Empress of Russia, and her rule would become legendary. She was a foreigner by birth, but she understood the Russian soul better than most. Under her leadership, the empire would expand further than ever before, and the court would become a center of art, philosophy, and intrigue. But her rise to power was a warning to anyone who thought the Romanov dynasty was secure. In Russia, the line between ruler and victim was razor thin, and the cost of ambition could be fatal. Catherine's reign promised glory, but it was built on a foundation of betrayal and blood. As the dust settled and the empire looked to the future, one question lingered in the minds of all who witnessed these events. How far would Russia go in its quest for greatness, and what new sacrifices would be demanded by those who dared to wear the crown? The story of the Romanovs was far from over, and the world was about to see just how high the stakes could climb.